Having money put away in a savings account for emergencies seems like a good way of keeping yourself financially secure. But not all people would agree, and they might have a point. So let us take a better look in today's video at what an emergency fund actually is, when it's a good or a bad idea, and how to build one properly. Without wasting any time, let's jump right in. Welcome back to PST Finance. Before we discuss when it's a good or bad idea to start building an emergency fund, you should consider what an emergency fund is actually for and when you should and shouldn't use it. You might think this is actually very simple. An emergency fund should be used, well, in the case of an emergency. That's true, but empty. It's not immediately clear what should and shouldn't be considered an emergency. Some people, for example, believe that you should only use your emergency fund if you're almost starving or can't pay the most basic bills. They believe only life-threatening situations like these should be called an emergency. On the other hand, other people believe that not being able to pay off your medical debt or your mortgage is also a pretty big issue that requires the use of an emergency fund, even if you can still afford the basic necessities. This isn't the end of it. Some cases are even trickier. What about credit card debt or phone bills? We could go on. The basic point is that unless it's clear where to draw the line between what is and what isn't an emergency situation, you could end up wasting your money by using your emergency fund to pay for something it's not meant for, which would defeat the point of it. So, what should you use an emergency fund for? First, instead of narrowly focusing on what situations should be considered an emergency, think of the overall purpose of an emergency fund. It is to save you from short-term financial troubles that can end up costing you more over time. To illustrate with an example, suppose your car gets totaled and you can't afford the $3,000 repair costs. If you can take out a high-interest payday loan to pay for the repair, then, in theory, you don't have to use your emergency fund in this situation. However, say that the loan would cost you a total of $4,500, while you have $3,500 stashed in a savings account as an emergency fund. Why shouldn't you use your savings to pay $3,000 for the repair and save yourself the $1,000 you would otherwise lose because of the loan? After all, instead of making monthly payments for the loan, you could just rebuild your emergency fund by depositing a certain amount of money into your savings account at the end of each month. The general lesson here is that you should always do the math. If something comes up and you find yourself unable to afford something, consider your options and see whether taking out loans or letting debt accumulate would cost you more money in the long term. Note that it's very important for you, when considering which option would be better, to take many other factors into consideration, in addition to the abstract, which would cost more money question. So you should keep your credit score in mind. If you ignore credit card debt for too long or fail to pay many of your bills on time, your credit score will go down. So make sure to factor that in, especially if you're planning to take a big step in the future that requires a good credit score, like buying a house. Another important factor to consider is your emotional and mental well-being. Say you've been laid off from your job and are desperately looking for another one. The last thing your mental health would need in such a situation is to let debt accumulate before your eyes and be forced to deal with debt collectors. It also wouldn't help to take out high-interest loans or minimize your expenses to an extreme just to leave your emergency fund untouched. Mental health problems could seriously diminish your ability to budget properly and find a new job. So investing in your mental well-being may also be a good financial decision in many cases and could justify finally withdrawing money from your savings account. Of course, this is not to say that you shouldn't reduce your expenses a little bit if you're currently unemployed and living off your emergency fund, for example. Try to make a list of all your expenses without omitting anything and start eliminating, at least temporarily, what adds the least value to your life at the highest cost. So if you haven't already noticed, caring about your mental health doesn't mean wasting your money on unnecessary stuff. Having to use your emergency savings is already bad enough financially. This actually brings us to the first reason why an emergency fund might be a bad investment. An emergency fund will be pointless if you keep spending it unnecessarily. You might think you're strong-willed enough to keep yourself from doing so, but a lot of people get greedy when they look at the amount of money that keeps growing bigger in their bank accounts. It's your responsibility to remind yourself all the time that this is money that should never be spent except in the difficult situations we discussed. One good way of keeping yourself from wasting your savings is to keep them in a separate bank account, preferably with a different bank than the one you mainly deal with. This creates a mental barrier that can help you keep yourself in check, but the barrier is far from the only benefit. It's generally recommended that you don't keep all your funds in one place because you never know what could mess up your relationship with your bank. Technical and administrative issues, like being misidentified as a person with tax issues, are always possible, so you want to save some money somewhere else. Another reason why starting the process of building an emergency fund may be bad for you is if you already are in debt and the amount of monthly payments you have to make exceeds the amount you can put away in a savings account. There's no point in putting away $150 per month into a 4.5% savings account if you have to pay the same monthly amount to pay off debt with a 10% interest. You'd be losing money faster than you're saving, since stretching the debt payment plan would let the interest eat away at your money. So much for the reasons against an emergency fund, but what can be said for it? Most of the benefits have already been covered. It spares you the trouble of taking out loans or accumulating debt in difficult times, which could cost you more in the long term. It can also help you keep your mental health in check and reduce stress when you're unemployed or too ill to work. Another obvious benefit is that an emergency fund can be a great help when it comes to unexpected medical expenses. Statistics show that many of those who are struggling with medical debt actually have insurance, and one study linked 60% of bankruptcy cases to medical debt. It'd be a good idea to have a certain amount of money saved for medical emergencies. It's very important that your savings cover your out-of-pocket maximum. A common mistake people make is stopping saving and feeling safe even though their savings are still short of the out-of-pocket maximum for medical insurance. They suddenly find themselves unexpectedly having to pay thousands of dollars. The benefits of emergency funds are clear, and even if you disagree with me, here's how to start saving anyway. Determine the amount of money you'd like to save from the beginning. This first depends on how long you want your emergency fund to last. Some people believe a 3-month fund is enough, and others try to save an amount that can last up to 12 months or more. I think 3 months is too short. It can be difficult to find a job in 3 months if the job market is especially bad. On the other hand, a 12-month fund is a huge amount of money for most people, and having such an unrealistic goal might put them off the task. That's why the generally recommended number is 6 months. Second, you must determine how much money can last you 6 months. To calculate this, look for an online calculator that makes listing all your necessary expenses easy. Add a small amount of money, depending on what you can afford, and that will be the monthly amount you put away. Third, and finally, always readjust if necessary. Look at the amount of money you have saved every other week, and if you think you can save more, don't hesitate. And that's it for today's video. Now you know what an emergency fund is, when it's a good idea, and when it's not, so that you can make your own choice. What do you think about emergency funds? Are they a good idea, or are there other alternatives? Please let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more videos like this. See you in the next video.